Your coaching client is coming to you for a change. They want to have a better relationship. They want to make more money. They want to fix their body. They want to lose 50 pounds. But whatever it is, they are going to need to alter some of their habits, probably some of their mindset or emotions. And ultimately, that turns into different results in some part of their life. But how do you change all that? Well, as a coach, my job is to be adept at helping my clients, supporting my client, partnering with my client on making the internal changes that almost no one else around them can possibly help them make. In order to do that, I've got to understand, why are they the way they are? What exactly is making them tick? And if you go back to where it all started for your client, what makes your client the way they are, what makes them feel what they feel and do what they do, is something that I call parental imprinting. The idea is simple. Almost every client you're ever going to work with continues to live the way that their parents train them to live, even without necessarily knowing that they were training their kids. Now, why is your client that way? Because they are driven by one primary drive. They're craving for love. Every human being needs love. And the primary source of love initially for your coaching client usually is their parents. And so their parent imprints upon your client the way they behave, feel, their mindset, their beliefs, and then that becomes habitual. It perpetuates into the rest of their life. So parents imprint their children through reinforcement learning and through meeting or not meeting your client's survival needs. And because survival needs are like the puppet strings of your client and of any human being, it actually controls their behavior and their mindset. And so these experiences tend to significantly impact who your client becomes, what they believe, and also how they tend to currently meet their survival needs. Now, what do I mean by reinforcement learning? Well, reinforcement learning is a reward system. And every human being wants certain rewards, certain psychic rewards, emotional rewards. And so if your client does something and then they're punished for it, they're probably not going to do that anymore. But if they're rewarded for that very thing, even if it's a disempowering or destructive behavior or emotion, they'll get addicted to it. But the bottom line is that parents are the primary source of emotional rewards for your client in early life. They're the primary source of all survival needs for your client. They're the source of certainty, variety, love and connection, as we talked about a second ago, and significance, a sense of attention or ego or pride. All those things I just mentioned are survival needs. They control our behavior in life. So anyone who pulls those strings becomes the puppeteer of that person. And even if there's nothing else that would perpetuate this other than a sense of certainty and habit, most people, even into adulthood, end up living out the same patterns, the same emotions, the same belief systems, the same behaviors, just habitually speaking, that their parents imprinted upon them. Make sense? Now, when your client is young, they're just brimming with possibility. They could be anything. They could do anything. They could feel anything. They're infinite possibility, and they have total flexibility in how they show up in the world. And we see this. Kids are unpredictable. They do crazy stuff. We never really exactly know what's going to come through them because they really are infinite possibility. But very quickly, those kids tend to embrace or divorce various ways of being, acting, behaving, feeling, primarily due to these reward and punishment systems that parents imprint upon them. And kids learn very, very quickly. They notice what's being rewarded. They notice how they need to show up or how they have to avoid showing up, who they need to be, what they should be doing, what they can never be, what they could never do. And that forms your client's personality, their persona in early life. And then through more reinforcement and habit, that becomes their nature, their character, their actual identity, who they think that they are. What's ironic about this is that has nothing to do with who they are. They've just been reinforced to become that person, and so they think that's them. So imagine that you decide unconsciously that you can never be confrontational, or you always have to be funny, or you can never be sad. Whatever it might be. Now this is based upon, again, rewards and punishments from parents. But if that's the mindset here for your client, they will start to suppress and express themselves in alignment with that programming. Make sense? Now, all of us have a dark side. All of us have a sad side. All of us have a funny side. All of us have a confrontational side. Again, those are all the possibilities that emerge within us as young people. So that side of us, if we divorce ourselves from it, if we disown that part, well, that saps energy because we're constantly suppressing. We're constantly wanting to be a certain way, wanting to do certain things because it's just natural, it's part of being human. But we say, no, 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 I can't do it. That suppression, that strangulation of who we are, of how we need to feel, be, and do, costs us tremendous energy, and it actually costs us our aliveness. So your client might ask you, why am I always tired? Now, other than biology, it could be just that they're exhausted from trying to control who they are day in, day out, just to try to fit the expectations of their parents or probably somebody else in their life at this point that they're blaming it on. And because your client is now incomplete, right? They've split their personality into who they can be and who they can't be. That makes them less effective. There are going to be times where they've got to be sad just in order to fully experience life or to let people know that they need help. There are going to be times where they've got to confront somebody, and if they can't or won't, well, they're going to be completely ineffective in those scenarios. Now they're half a person, they're incomplete, they're kind of broken in a way, and if nothing else, they're quite ineffective in all sorts of areas of their life that demand those other parts of themselves that they divorce themselves from. Make sense? Now, there's another nuance to this that I haven't mentioned, which is that when your client is young, they look to role models. Usually this is going to be one or both of their parents. And their parents have their own nature, their own way of being, their own way of thinking and acting and feeling, their own belief systems. Now your client's got to decide how they're going to relate to these role models. Are they going to embrace those role models and how they need to think, be, believe, etc.? Or are they going to defy those role models? Are they going to act in defiance? I'm sure you've probably seen a client or a friend who is just like their father or tries to be just like their mother. They aspire to it because they look up to that person so much. But we've also met a few clients or friends who despise a parent, and they've made it their life's mission to be the opposite of the way that parent is. This is tremendously impactful in defining who your client becomes, what they believe, how they act, and the emotional center of gravity, kind of their emotional fuel of choice, so to speak. I want to be like this parent, or I want to be nothing like that particular parent. The way I like to look at this imprinting process in terms of parental role modeling is that everyone's fundamental nature boils down to a bias. Most simply put, there's different survival needs that we tend to over and undervalue. Now, my model for survival needs, which is different from Maslow's and many others, is that we all need certainty to survive, but we also need variety to survive, the opposite of that. We also all need a sense of significance, a sense of ego and pride, and that we're unique and special in some way, but we also need a sense of love and connection, a sense of oneness where we might lose ourselves in a relationship with someone else or God or a family or a community, let's say. So these are the 4 survival needs that I tend to look for: certainty, variety, significance, and love and connection. Now, what forms the nature of someone is which of these 4 do they tend to put first, operationally speaking. In other words, which one do they live for the most? Everybody needs all 4, but some people live more for love. Other people live much more for significance, as you might imagine. They're much more pride and ego driven. Other people are totally about certainty and controlling everything and being safe and comfortable. And then there's the variety nuts that go out and bungee jump and skydive and do all sorts of crazy adventurous stuff. So what I'm looking for in this aspect of parental imprinting is, what was the nature of the parent? Were they more significance driven, or were they love driven, or were they certainty driven? And then I'm wondering, did the client embrace that same drive as their primary driving survival need? Or did they go in the opposite direction? My parent is all about significance and trying to be important. I'm going to focus on love. Or my parent is so fearful and they're so certainty driven and they're so obsessive and controlling. I'm going to be a variety crazy nut and go out there and do all this crazy adventurous stuff. Or do they embrace their parents' nature? My mother is a love bug and I'm a love bug too. We're just two peas in a pod. So those are the main ways that parental imprinting occurs. Number one, by reinforcement learning with our client in early life. And then number two, through role modeling of the client looking to the parent or parents as role models of how to be, or warnings of who not to be and how not to operate. So now that you got the theory behind this, here are the steps to take to discover what your client's parental imprint is and what it's based upon. This is a tremendous awareness exercise for your client to go through this, and they will literally discover why they are the way they are, what the deepest kind of initial events are that shaped their persona and their character and their nature, and also what the upsides and downsides of that programming actually is. It's pretty deep stuff. This is not about doing therapy with your client, by the way, or trying to find some deep wound to heal. This is just about them learning about who they are and what shaped who they are as well. So step one, I want to ask my client, who are you closer to in your family? Your mother or your father? Whose love did you crave the most? Your mother or your father? They may love both of them, but their chances are going to prioritize and crave and be hungry for the love of one of them over the other. That's the one I want to focus in on. Second, I want to learn about what this parent is like. What was their nature? Now, you might literally just ask them what survival needs that parent tended to value. But if you haven't taught your client that model, at least ask them, hey, what was your father like? How did they behave? What did they seem to value? What do you think they believed? What did you learn about them? What kind of person were they? You get the idea. We're just getting a general sense of what are the main points of who this person was or is, and how does your client see them through their eyes? Third, and this is one of the key questions for that first aspect of parental imprinting, who did you have to be for that parent? So if it's the father, I would ask them, who'd you have to be for your father? Now, the other side of that question is, who did you have to never be for your father? Now, sometimes there can be some mild confusion with trying to understand what the heck that question means. Just give them the idea. It's like, hey, look, there were certain spoken or unspoken rules of how to operate, how to act, how to be, what emotions, what beliefs that you really needed to abide by. Think of them as rules, so to speak, and also rules of what you could never be or never do or never feel or never say as well. Again, most of the time, this is never talked about in families. Sometimes it can be, but for the most part, these are unspoken rules that the child, the client that you're interviewing here, learns through unconscious conditioning, reinforcement, rewards and punishment, and then also just the way everybody operates. And it doesn't mean that's the reality. It's just you want to get a sense of the way your client actually thinks about this stuff. The way it occurred to them. That's what matters, not reality here. Now, you should take a ton of notes when they rattle off all the ways they had to be and all the ways they couldn't be and what they had to do and how they had to feel and what they had to believe. I would take a lot of notes off of that particular story that your client is going to share with you. Try to boil it down to simple 1 or 2 word descriptions. I had to be strong. I had to be happy. I could never be depressed. I could never be angry. Whatever it was. Now, one of the things you're going to notice is that as you share back these descriptions to your client, and then you ask them, do you think this is the way you are today? Are you generally most of the time happy and committed and hardworking and funny and just whatever it is that they said? 9 times out of 10, they'll say, oh my gosh, that's exactly the way I am. Because they are generally operating according to what they were reinforced, what they were trained, what they were compelled to do, to be, and to feel in their young life, and that's now perpetuated into this moment today. Now, one of the critical distinctions that you can then bring out in the coaching process is helping them to see how that one way of being, where they could never be the opposite, is creating a rigidity, creating a lack of flexibility, creating limitations for them, and also sapping energy, like we talked about, and reducing their effectiveness depending on the context. When your client can start to own the parts of themselves that they have shunned, the parts of themselves that they've divorced themselves from, the parts of themselves that they've tried to get rid of and suppress, they'll get their energy back. They'll complete themselves as a person. They'll be a whole person rather than a half a person. And they'll become effective where they've usually probably been failing and struggling and not capable of producing results in many parts of their life. And that's something you can do in ongoing sessions with them. Finally, whether it's through directly questioning your client or just talking to them about this, check in with, did your client embrace the role model of their parents, or did they reject the role models of their parents? Did they operate with the same needs driving them? Did they operate with the same belief systems? Did they operate with the same emotional fuel of choice? Or did they divorce themselves from the way their parent or parents were to try to be very different and defy that way of operating? By the way, either way is fine, but it gives you a sense of the rigid path that they've chosen that easily could be problematic when they can't allow themselves to be the other way, where they don't have that behavioral or emotional flexibility. Your client is more than just one anything deep down, but most clients don't operate that way because of the exact patterns and phenomenon that we talked about today. So if you got questions about this, put them in the comments. If this made sense to you and you find that this might be a useful way to approach helping your client with self-discovery and transformation, give me a like, and if you want to see more of these videos, subscribe. Now, there's 2 videos I'd recommend you watching after this one. The first one is where I go into this psychological framework in even more depth in a live stream that discusses parental imprinting with even more detail and depth. And that should be on the screen right now. On the other side, I actually originally learned this approach, technique, and model from Tony Robbins, and I've got an entire playlist of all the different coaching approaches, models, and techniques that I've learned from Tony, and you can check that out as well. I'll see you there.